Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Is Donald Trump the worst presidential candidate in modern American history? It's not just the fact that he's insulted African Americans, Latinos, bona fide war heroes like John McCain and arguably all women, or even that he is, allegedly, at best, a sex pest. It's just so hard to know where he actually stands on anything. Is he really going to force the Mexicans to build a wall? How? You might argue that Hillary is not much better, but with the announcement that the FBI is to reopen its investigation into her emails, the most bitter election in modern history has gone right back to the wire.
The FBI finally did what was right.
Well, if you're like me, you probably have a few questions about it.
Hillary has nobody to blame but herself.
It's pretty strange to put something like that out with such little information right before an election.
She's got bad instincts.
It's unprecedented, and it is deeply troubling.
Her criminal action was willful, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful.
Of course, Donald Trump is already making up lies about this.
When the outcome is fixed, when the system is rigged, people lose hope.
Everybody gets knocked down. What matters is whether you get back up.
I think I need to begin on what you think's happening. I mean, what do you think is happening in America? Is it a rebellion like we saw with Brexit? Is there any connection between the two? Is it just a rejection of everything in Washington? What do you make of it?
Well, I've actually just recently got back from Oklahoma. I was making a documentary there, and I sat around with these people, and they had all, it was 3 months ago, sorry, in Super Tuesday, they'd all just voted for Trump. They think he's a brilliant businessman, and they want to do better. They view it completely as an aspirational vote, the people I was with. And it was good to be with people who were voting for Trump, because you don't necessarily get to sit around and have a drink with those people and see why they vote for him. And they vote for him because they are exactly what you were talking about before, aspirational. They want to do better. They've seen him on The Apprentice, and that's what's happening. But I think in the sense of what's just happened with the emails and this new announcement of the FBI probe, again, into Hillary, I think what's so striking about this is here is a woman who, you know, arguably is the best qualified candidate they've ever had to take the White House in terms of her experience both as the First Lady and then in her own right as a Secretary of State. And yet, on both occasions, she is being judged, one, for the sexual actions of a man, her husband. And then again, Anthony Weiner, who's the congressman who's being looked at by the FBI, it's complicated here, but one of her aides was married to Anthony Weiner, Huma Abedin, and it's her emails that have been found on his computer that's reopened this. He's being investigated for sexting a 15-year-old. So it's the sexual demeanours of a second man that are now essentially overshadowing her. And I think that's just an important point to make, because a lot of this gets lost in the fact that how much has her gender played a role in how much Donald Trump has been able to cash in on certain criticisms, and how people also look at her, because you would expect she's an incredibly popular candidate because of that experience, and yet the opposite seems to be true.
Are you suggesting that basic prejudice is at play in quite a lot of the opposition and in the way he particularly plays against her?
I think some of those assaults would not be there if she was not a female candidate, and I think it's a horrible irony that just a few days before they go to the polls, she is also finding herself, although I'm not to say what is being, what's being put forward here. I was speaking to someone in the military only yesterday. If she has access private information that was so sensitive outside of her office, we may not be able to access this, but it's like MI5 or MI6 looking into Theresa May. That's how serious it is. I think it's important to put it in British framework, and if she has done that, many military people have gone to prison for far less. So it's not to underplay how serious the allegations are.
Diane, you've been in politics a long time. What do you think, what is your assessment of what is happening in America? Will we look back at, in 20 years and view this as a blip, that this populist candidate came and went, or are we going to see many more populist candidates kind of championing rebellion against the Capitol?
I think it's extraordinary to try and analyse the American presidential elections in terms of emails and sex and nonsense. The truth is that it seems to me, if you look at it statistically, a lot of the support for Donald Trump is, he was a television, reality show guy, but it's a cry of rage from Americans who are not black, who are not Hispanic, who are not women, who don't feel part of where America is going in the 21st century. That's what's really happening. And the danger for the Republicans is not just that Donald Trump will lose, but he will lose black and Latino and female voters in such numbers that the Republicans will lose Congress and lose the Senate. There are serious social trends. It's far more than about emails and nonsense about Anthony Weiner.
But do you get why people don't like Hillary? What do you think that's about?
I think ever since Hillary, her husband was governor of Arkansas, Hillary's been dogged by a horrible misogyny. I think that's what it is.
Which was the point I was making.
Yeah. Ken, what do you
well,
think is going on?
I agree with the first point Darren made, which is there's an economic crisis in the States, there's mass unemployment there, and people feel excluded. And Hillary Clinton is part of that establishment that's allowed that mass unemployment to rise. She also supported the Iraq War, that illegal Iraq War with all the terrible consequences. And she's a figure of the rich establishment. And so, of course, people want to vote anti-establishment, they'll vote for someone else. The fact that there's someone else is such an appalling character in every respect, and represents the worst capitalist excesses you can imagine, of course, is another con trick.
I think if Bernie Sanders had been the Democratic candidate, he might be doing better against Trump now.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he would. I'm sure he would.
Tom, what's your...
If the Democrats had actually picked someone who was not well known across the states for 20, 30 years, not loathed, whether Diane's right through misogyny or because, or the alleged corruption
She's
that
an
the Clintons...
incredibly well-qualified candidate. She should be sailing home, shouldn't she?
And she's also incredibly cold-hearted to the American viewers. She may be the most wonderful warm person in someone's front room, but she is very, very difficult to communicate any form of warmth across TV screens. She represents everything that Americans dislike about Washington, stuck up and centrist and elitist. And against her, pretty much any Republican win, which is why I left Trump.
You've covered a million elections. How serious do you assess this email story to be?
In all honesty, and I have to say it's tremendous, we've actually got a final run-in that's now getting exciting with the polls narrowing. I don't think it's going to change things. I think this email scandal with the hidden emails, this has been running now for over a year. If you took a view on that, you've had your view on Hillary already. It's not going to make you suddenly want to vote Trump.
But do you think it's something that people should take seriously on the grounds? I mean, I look at it and I think, well, she communicated through a private email account. She liked to have things printed out. They messed up a lot of stuff. Does it look conspiratorial? Does it look deliberate? Does it look like something that you would really think worse of a person apart from, you know...
Well, the answer is yes, you should, because it's almost certainly against the law. Under various American laws of freedom of information, you do have to declare all your public correspondence in a public way, or it should be declarable. So it's crooked. I mean, Donald Trump is right about that. The problem is it's about the least crooked thing you can do in government. As I say, everyone knows all about it already.
OK, can we just move on to what kind of president either of them might be? We live in a point where, you know, Vladimir Putin has just been sailing warships past our front door, and he's going off to bomb Aleppo to smithereens, we assume, what's little left that he hasn't bombed already. Obama was a non-interventionist... Maybe I can come to you. Obama was not a very interventionist president, and some people say that was a great thing because there were no Iraqs, and some people say that was a bad thing because he didn't intervene in Syria. What kind of president do you think Hillary Clinton, let's assume she wins from home, what kind of president do you think she would be, and what would it mean for us?
I think, and this is one of my reservations about Hillary, is that she would be more interventionist than Barack Obama was. As his Secretary of State, I think she argued for intervention in a number of cases and he blocked it. But Donald Trump, I mean, you know who's really scared about Donald Trump? The Republican establishment, because they don't know what he'll do. He might intervene or he might stay friends with Putin. I mean, he would be a complete wild card. That's why I don't think he can win.
Tom, because I know you have strong views on this, can I just come back to you on the Russian question? What do you think the new American president should be doing with Vladimir Putin?
I think she should and will intervene. For 5 years now, the world has really abandoned Syria. We blinked in 2011 when the war started, when the civil war started. We refused to take sides. This is the West, this is Britain and America. And mayhem pursued, and the most appalling, ugly civil war with hundreds of thousands of people killed, millions of refugees spread now all over the world, coming into Europe and creating the immigration crisis is coming back to bite us. And into this vacuum entered Vladimir Putin. Strongmen bullies always take advantage of weak scenarios. And and I'm loath to mention the H word, the Hitler word on TV shows, but there are incredible parallels now building between what Putin is doing now and what Hitler did in the 1930s. If you stand back and allow tyrants to run roughshod over an entire countries and people, they're only going to do it to another country.
I think this is dangerous. Sorry, I think this is really dangerous. And when she started talking in that way, we'll be in World War III. I think it's nonsense, really. I mean, if you look at the Middle East, you've got to be realistic. Russia's only got one ally there. The West has got, or most of the countries are Western allies. Russia's only got one. If Syria is likely to fall, now, I hold no brief for Putin. I mean, gangster capitalist that he is and runs a terrible state. But it is inevitable that he will try to defend his ally. It's the only one he's got in the region. And you talk about, like, Cold War build-up. And your introduction, Tom, I have to challenge. Yes, Russian warships going through. What's the West doing with its troops in Eastern Europe? If it's not marching around the old Russian borders to show who's in control. And you talk about the war crimes in Aleppo, and yes, there are war crimes, it looks like. What are we doing in Yemen? We're arming the Saudis to do worse in Yemen.
Well, we are, but there's quite a lot of controversy about that, isn't there?
Well,
a lot of pressure on us to stop
it's our bullets that are killing people in Yemen. Why aren't we seeing those pictures?
Why is it can I just ask you, what would you do particularly about Putin? Are you not bothered about, you know, his bellicose and interventionist tendencies, as some would see it? Does that not bother you? You think it's vastly overstated?
Well, I think it's a response to warlike and bellicose actions from the West. I mean, the Iraq War was the biggest bellicose and warlike action you could get. And what about the chemical weapons we dropped in Fallujah and the deformed babies that are being born now? Do we not count that as war crimes?
But I don't understand. Why can't you answer that question? Because you just seem to be presenting other scenarios.
No, I'm just saying have some balance and try to understand why Putin is acting.
Once you've had the balance, what do you do about Putin?
Well, what you don't do is put British troops on the ground warfare in Syria. Didn't work in Afghanistan. We had to retreat from Afghanistan. In the end, it's got to be... What's happening is Syria is a cockpit for other great powers like Iran, like Russia, and there has to be negotiations between those great powers.
Darren, that's been British troops, for 5 years.
British troops didn't work in Afghanistan. They certainly didn't work in Iraq. Iraq is far more unstable now. And the idea that sending British troops into Syria would help anything.
But Tom is right. They have been having this. They have been trying to get talks. I mean, they had talks many times already this year, and they haven't produced what everyone wanted. So, and even leaving aside Syria for a moment, does Vladimir Putin's kind of more aggressive and interventionist strategy bother you? If you were coming into government now, would that be high up your list of things to worry about?
The truth is that Vladimir Putin, I mean, he is, as Ken has said, a less than wholly admirable person. But what he has to be worrying about is the Russian economy. He makes all this noise and there's all this bluster to distract his people from what's happening to the Russian economy. And I think that this is all a show, and in the end, he has to take care of his own people in Russia. And I say, to use this to say that we would send other people's children to war in Syria. I'm sorry, I've been there as a politician. I mean, we were there in Afghanistan, we were there in Iraq, and I will not vote for it again.
I'm not suggesting we launch a hot land war against Putin now. I'm simply saying, well, to start with, we could have imposed some sort of sanctions on him and his generals and his politicians who are about to fly an aircraft carrier full of jets over Aleppo and drop a whole load of bombs. Does the Labour Party support increased personal sanctions on Putin? Travel bans, asset freezes?
We think that the answer to Putin is
You don't support sanctions against Putin?
If you let me finish. We think the answer to Putin is not troops, it's not boots on the ground, but we do think there have to be negotiations, and as part of those negotiations with the great powers in the region, you may be looking at sanctions.
So you don't support sanctions?
Can we ask you, would you end arms supplies to Saudi that will stop killing people in Yemen?
We should have a whole new agenda to talk about Saudi.
Will you stop the arms sale to Saudi immediately?
Well, I'm not in government, so of course I'd be delighted to.
Through your paper? Advocate.
You give far too much power to my paper, Cameron.
No, I'm just saying, would you see your paper advocate the end of the arms sale to Saudi that are killing people in thousands and thousands?
That is something
this is a fascinating debate. Saudi and Yemen is, of course, a whole different question. No doubt we'll be talking about it, perhaps even next week. That is, though, I'm afraid, all we've got time for tonight.